Hello, my name is Claire Bennett, and this is the story of how my family refused to come to my wedding because I chose to marry a farmer. They called him unworthy, they called me a disgrace. But what they didn't know was that the man they dismissed carried more honor than all their polished names combined. If you believe dignity and love matter more than appearances, subscribe now, because the next part of my story will prove it. They didn't come. That's the picture seared into my heart. A stone chapel in Asheville, North Carolina, autumn, leaves scattering across the steps and whole rows of pews left bare where my family should have been. Not one of them walked through those doors. Not my father with his polished shoes. Not my mother with her pearls. Not my brother who once swore he'd be my shield. Not even my younger sister who had vowed to stand at my side. They left me to face the aisle alone. And why? Because I had chosen Aaron Caldwell, a farmer. 43 years old with sun in his hair and soil under his nails, a man who rose before first light to check the fields and worked past dusk repairing the barn. To me, he was steady, the kind of man who could hold a storm without breaking. To them, he was small. A farmer poor in their eyes, not worthy of a 39-year-old woman who had built a career in finance and carried the Bennett name with all its polished reputation. My father's last words haunted me as I adjusted the veil. If you marry him, you do it without us. So I did. But what they didn't know, what time would later force them to see, was that Aaron's quiet honor outshone their country clubs and investment portfolios. That morning should have been joy. Instead, it began with the cold buzz of my phone. The message glowed against the dawn. From Dad, "We won't be there. This is your mistake." I stared at it until the letters blurred. Some part of me had believed blood would matter more than pride. That belief shattered with one text. When I stepped into the kitchen, my friend Carla was already making tea. She took one look and knew. "They're not coming, are they?" I shook my head. She wrapped her arms around me. "You've got us. You've got him. That's enough." I nodded, but the ache lingered. By late morning, the chapel in Asheville was alive with neighbors and folks from the farming community. Homemade quilts draped across the porch rails, mason jars of wildflowers lined the sills, and the smell of cornbread and apple pies floated in from the fellowship hall. These weren't people with power or pedigrees. They were Aaron's people, farmers, teachers, old veterans with sunburnt faces and worn caps, and they filled the room with warmth. Still, my eyes couldn't help drifting to the empty pews we had saved for my family. Their absence sat like a hollowness inside the celebration. At the door I stood in my gown, the lace heavy against the humid air. My finance blazer lay folded over my arm, the merit pins catching stray sunlight. For a heartbeat, I thought of wearing it as armor, a reminder of the world I had built without them. Instead, I walked forward as nothing more than a bride carrying only my own backbone. The organ struck the first chords of Amazing Grace, thin and uneven but strong enough to fill the rafters. Whispers rose as I moved down the aisle. "She's walking alone. Where's her family?" But step by step I kept going. Aaron stood at the altar, blue eyes steady, his hands trembling only slightly. His smile was not for my credentials, not for the Bennett name, but for me. That smile was enough to drown out the ache of rejection, because I knew something no one else did yet. They thought they had measured him and found him lacking. They thought their silence was the last word, but they hadn't seen the truth. And when they finally did, it would be too late to erase their absence. And me, I was always the odd one out, the daughter who scuffed her shoes, who asked questions that never fit neatly into my father's world, who pinned ROTC flyers to my bedroom corkboard while country club invitations sat unopened on the dresser. The cracks between us showed the day I turned 18 and told him I'd enlisted. We were standing in the Bennett kitchen, sunlight falling across marble countertops, the smell of Mom's peach cobbler thick in the air. I thought just maybe he'd be proud that his daughter had chosen service. Instead, He snapped his newspaper closed. Not for girls. You'll regret it. It wasn't the disappointment of forgetting to polish silver or misplacing a thank you note. It was heavier, like I'd stepped off the path he'd paved brick by brick. From then on, every holiday turned into cold shoulders and clipped remarks. Michael arrived with his law school casebooks, Dad boasting of his brilliance to anyone within earshot. Anne floated in draped in silk, a new fiancé always on her arm, and Dad opened champagne like royalty had entered the room. And me, I came home from Fort Bragg uniform, pressed medals, pinned stories I couldn't tell. Dad would glance once, nod stiffly, and pivot the conversation elsewhere. His silence cut deeper than any words. The divide became a canyon the day I brought Aaron home. We'd met the autumn before at the Asheville Harvest Fair. He was tending the 4-H booth boots. Dusty neck, sunburnt smile, easy. We talked over cider and hay bales, and by sundown I knew he was real. At our dinner table, Aaron extended his calloused hand. Dad shook it once, lips pressed tight. Then he scoffed. A farmer. Claire, be serious. That man hauls hay. He doesn't belong in this family. Aaron only thanked my mother for supper. His dignity made my cheeks burn with both pride and sorrow. On the drive back to Asheville, Aaron said quietly, "Your dad doesn't think much of me." I laughed, sharp and bitter. He doesn't think much of anyone he can't use to polish his own reputation. But the truth stung. In my family, my father's word was gospel. Once he branded Aaron as not worthy, Michael and Anne fell right in line. At Thanksgiving, they smirked about me playing farm wife. At Easter, Anne asked, "When are you going to marry someone Dad can actually brag about?" Every remark was another brick in the wall they built between us. The army had drilled endurance into me, but nothing prepared me for the ache of being dismissed by blood. Still, I clung to Aaron. His steadiness held me when their scorn tried to erode me. I saw in him what they refused to see: a man who knew sacrifice, who had worn a uniform himself in the Guard, who carried scars from Iraq and never let them define him. My family saw dirt beneath his nails. I saw a partner who would never let me walk alone. That was the divide. Theirs was built on appearances, mine on service and love. I don't remember those years as battles with my family. I remember the quiet mornings on Aaron's farm outside Asheville, mist curling over the Blue Ridge foothills, the smell of hay, the lowing of cattle. 200 acres of stubborn land, an old red barn leaning but unbroken. To Aaron, every fence post was a promise, every seed a prayer. One night after I returned from drills at Fort Bragg, I found him elbow-deep under the hood of my old Honda, grease streaked across his arms. Within an hour, it ran smooth. When I teased, "Who needs a mechanic when I've got you?" he just smiled. A man ought to take care of the people he loves. That was Aaron. No flash, no pretense, just steady hands that fixed what was broken. Aaron carried stories too, though he never offered them easily. Piece by piece, I learned that before returning to the farm, he had served in the National Guard. He'd been deployed to Iraq, and though he rarely spoke of it, the truth showed itself in fragments. A scar curved across his shoulder, jagged and pale from shrapnel. When I asked, he shrugged. Just a reminder. But on restless nights, when a loud crack of thunder jolted him awake, I saw the shadows in his eyes. My farmer was also a soldier carrying ghosts my father would never acknowledge. To Dad, Aaron was nothing but dirt under his nails and diesel on his clothes. To me, he was the one person who understood the weight of service without me needing to explain. Life on the farm wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Saturdays fixing fences, Sundays at the little clapboard church down the road, suppers of fried chicken eaten on the porch while cicadas hummed in the trees. I swapped fatigues for worn jeans, tossing hay bales until my arms gave out. When duty called me back to Fort Bragg, Aaron never complained. He just kissed me goodbye and said, "Come home safe." One winter night, after hours of hauling feed in the snow, he led me behind the barn to the old oak tree. Stars scattered thick as salt across the Carolina sky. His hands shook as he pulled a small box from his coat. Inside lay a plain gold band. No diamond, no frills. "Claire," he said softly, "I can't promise riches, but I promise you'll never stand alone again. Will you marry me?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." Breaking the news at home was another battlefield. Dad's face turned red. "An officer marrying a farmer. You'll disgrace us." Michael sneered. Anne rolled her eyes and Mom stayed silent. But that night in Aaron's kitchen with stew simmering on the stove and his laughter easing my bruised heart, I knew I had chosen right. If you've ever stood your ground against family judgment, this story is for you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter where the wedding day revealed who truly stood with me and who vanished when it mattered most. Because honor isn't about money or names etched on plaques. It's about showing up when the work is hard and standing beside the people you love, no matter the cost. And Aaron, my soldier-turned-farmer, carried more honor in his calloused hands than my family ever cared to understand. The morning of our wedding broke humid and heavy, a Carolina July pressing down like a weight. The small clapboard chapel outside Asheville stood ready. Its white paint was chipped, its bell tower leaned, but it shone proudly with wildflowers from Aaron's fields and quilts neighbors had loaned. The women from the congregation had strung mason jars with candles late into the night, their laughter spilling through open windows. It wasn't the wedding my parents imagined for me. No chandeliers, no hotel ballroom, no waiters in tuxedos. It was the wedding I wanted. Simple, honest, filled with people who showed up because they loved us, not because they needed to be seen. Still, my eyes kept wandering to the empty pews at the front. They were reserved for my family. They stayed bare hymnals, stacked Bibles untouched. I half expected the echo of my father's polished shoes, my mother's perfume trailing behind her Anne's clipped laughter. They never came. Instead, I had Carla, my army friend, adjusting my veil. I had Mrs. Langley from down the road pressing a bouquet of daisies into my hands. And I had the low rumble of tractors drifting from the hills, reminding me life went on no matter who showed up. When the hour came, I stood in the little side room, lace brushing against my boots. My uniform jacket ribbons gleaming hung on a chair. For a heartbeat, I considered wearing it proof of my worth. But I chose to walk as a bride, not a soldier. The organ wheezed into How Great Thou Art. Doors swung open. Light and heat rushed in. I stepped forward. Alone. Whispers rose. She's walking alone. Every step was more than lace and fabric. It carried years of dismissal, every holiday slight, every insult masked as politeness. Each step said one truth: I am here anyway. At the altar, Aaron's hand closed over mine, warm, steady, trembling. Aaron's smile said everything. The preacher's voice rose words about covenant and love, echoing against the wooden rafters. I nodded, though my thoughts wandered. I remembered Dad's final text, the one that sliced deeper than any blade. We won't be there. He's not worthy. My eyes flicked once more to the vacant pews at the front, the empty space where my family should have been. The sting was sharp, but beneath it something steadier burned, a calm fire I hadn't felt before. Because I knew the truth. I knew what they didn't, that the man beside me carried strength and history far beyond their shallow judgments. One day they'd see it. The vows blurred past the rings, the blessing, the kiss. The congregation erupted in applause, genuine and loud, filling the chapel until it felt alive. Half the room was empty, but the other half roared with joy. As we walked back down the aisle, Aaron squeezed my hand. You're not alone. You'll never be alone. I believed him. That evening, as the Blue Ridge Hills glowed gold in the setting sun and cicadas hummed their chorus, we slipped away from the reception. Neighbors laughed in the fellowship hall. Kids darted between tables. Veterans argued over dominoes. Women wrapped leftover pies in foil. It wasn't glamorous. It was real. Aaron led me out toward the barn, his sleeves rolled dust on his boots. The fading light caught the sweat at his temples, and I thought, this is what they turned their backs on. I lifted my phone. "Hold still," I teased. He laughed, leaning against the old John Deere. In one hand, casual as ever, he held the flag-draped shadow box that carried his Bronze Star and other commendations from Iraq. He'd never shown it off, but I told him, "It's not showing off. It's the truth." The camera clicked. There he was, wedding shirt, wrinkled hair, damp one arm steady on the tractor, the other cradling proof of a life lived with sacrifice. It wasn't even hurt. It was clarity. I opened the Bennett family group chat, Dad, Mom, Michael, Ann. My thumb hovered for a moment, then I sent the photo. No caption, no explanation. Just the truth in one frame. At first, silence. For an hour, my phone stayed dark. Aaron and I wandered back into the fellowship hall, ate a slice of pie, danced across the scuffed floor while neighbors clapped along. Veterans teased Aaron, slapping his back, telling him he cleaned up nice. I laughed, but my eyes kept flicking to my phone. Near midnight, it buzzed. First one notification, then a flood. My mother's voice cracked through the speaker. "Claire, honey, we didn't know. We had no idea." Her sobs filled the line. "I should have asked. I should have been there. I'm so sorry." Anne chimed in sharp with disbelief. "You never told us he served. You never said I cut her off. Would it have mattered? You wouldn't have listened." Michael sent a single text, then another. "He looks different than I thought." But it was my father's call that stilled me. His voice, usually ironclad, trembled. "Claire, we didn't know. We thought he..." Stopped. A pause. Then, barely audible, "We were wrong." For a long moment, I let silence hang. He had given me silence for years. Finally, I said, "Yes, Dad, you were." And I ended the call. Aaron slipped his arm around me, kissed my temple. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," I whispered. "Not for me, for them. They needed to see the truth." Weeks later, when the heat of July gave way to August haze, the town held its annual Buncombe County Veterans Day ceremony. It wasn't flashy, no cameras, no parades, just flags flapping against brick storefronts, the smell of barbecue drifting from the VFW hall, children carrying posters that read, "Thank you, veterans." Aaron didn't want to go. He never did. "They're honoring people who did real things," he muttered, buttoning his cleanest shirt. "You did real things," I told him, straightening his collar. "And it's not just about you. It's about all of us who wore the uniform." He sighed, kissed my forehead, and we drove into town in his dusty old Ford. The ceremony began with prayer, then the anthem sung by a high school choir, the crowd's hands pressed solemnly over their hearts. I scanned the crowd, and my stomach tightened. There they were, my family, standing near the back, half hidden behind a troop of Boy Scouts. My mother clutched her purse as if it were armor. Anne stood with her arms crossed, Michael in a tailored jacket that looked out of place among the faded ball caps. My father was stiff as ever, jaw-locked eyes unreadable. I hadn't invited them. They'd come on their own. The mayor took the stage microphone, crackling. He spoke of service, of sacrifice, of small-town men and women who had left these North Carolina hills to fight in places most couldn't find on a map. Then he began calling names. "Captain Claire Bennett, United States Army." I stepped forward, uniform pressed, ribbons gleaming. Applause rose, respectful, steady. I saluted, accepted a certificate, shook hands. Then the mayor's voice shifted. "And today, we also honor someone whose service has often gone unseen. A man who fought in Iraq, who returned not to accolades, but to the quiet work of keeping a farm alive for his family and this community. His worth is not in bank accounts, but in character." Please join me in thanking Sergeant Aaron Caldwell, Bronze Star recipient, farmer and neighbor to us all. The square erupted. Veterans saluted. Kids waved flags. Neighbors cheered until Aaron froze ears, red eyes wide. He tried to wave it off, but the applause pulled him forward. The mayor clasped his hand, clapped his shoulder. I turned just enough to catch my father's face, pale lips pressed thin. He had seen the medals in a photo, but now he was watching the truth: his daughter honored in uniform, and the poor farmer he dismissed, saluted by an entire town. Afterward, as the crowd mingled, Dad approached slowly, as if each step cost him. His voice dropped low. "Claire, we misjudged him." His gaze flicked toward Aaron, who laughed easily with an old guardsman modest as ever. "You didn't know." I met his eyes steady. "Because you never asked." The words struck. He flinched, nodded once. Lines of shame creased his face. When he reached for Aaron's hand, Aaron only offered a polite nod. "Enjoy the ceremony, sir." Then Aaron slipped his hand into mine, steering me away, before my father could speak again. As we crossed the courthouse square, applause still echoing in the summer air, I felt lighter than I had in years. For so long my father's voice had defined me: disgrace, unworthy, not enough. But that day his silence said more than his words ever had. The reckoning wasn't loud. It wasn't a fight. It was the image of a proud man stripped of certainty, forced to face the truth with no place to hide. Years blur many details. I couldn't tell you what pie was served at our wedding reception, or which hymn the choir sang at the Veterans Day ceremony. But I will always remember the hush that fell over my father when the mayor called Aaron's name, and the way his hand hung unanswered when he tried to shake Aaron's. That silence lingered longer than any applause. Now, years later, I sit on the porch of our farmhouse outside Asheville. The rocking chair creaks beneath me, children's laughter rings from the yard, and the smell of cut hay drifts in from the fields where Aaron still works steady as the setting sun. This life isn't glamorous. It isn't the life my father imagined for his daughter. But it is real, built on love, service, and work that leaves your hands dirty, but your soul clean. My father passed a few years after that ceremony. He never truly apologized, not in words. He left money, property, and the Bennett name etched in stone. Michael runs the firm now. Anne still chases appearances. But me, I carry freedom, not weight. When folks mention us, they don't whisper "that Bennett girl who married down." They nod with respect. They know Aaron. They know the truth. And sometimes when the cicadas sing and the fields glow silver in the moonlight, I hear my father's old words: "He'll never be worthy of you." And I smile, because the man they dismissed turned out to be more than worthy. I've carried the weight of my family's silence, but I've also learned that love built on truth is worth more than approval built on pride. If my story resonates with you, I'd love for you to stand with me, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let me know if you've ever faced judgment for choosing your own path. And please subscribe, so together we can remind the world that real worth is measured in character, not appearances.